Welcome to In the News with Double O Des. I'm Des Bernardo, giving you my perspective on news from South Africa and the rest of the world. In this video, I want to deal with you... Quiet! In this video, I want to cover a follow-up with you on the situation in Mozambique. And when I start off this video, I want to make it clear to you that firstly, as I mentioned in the video I did yesterday on the situation in the northern province of Mozambique, that the people that started this movement and got infiltrated by other organizations were followers of an extremist form of Islam. So many people that are Muslims, and some of them have contacted me, they do not associate with these people. So the first thing I want to explain to you is when I speak of extremists, that I speak of people removed from the norm. In other words, you cannot see the normal people that practice a religion, whether Islam, Hinduism, whether it's Christian, whether it's Jewish. They do not speak for the majority of people at all. That's why they are extremists, they are small groups, and they generally cause havoc. And you get that in all different faiths. So in this case, understand that your Muslim friends do not believe in the same things that these people believe, and I have to make that abundantly clear. It's a pity that I have to, it should be obvious based on all my other videos that I have done, but the article that I want to cover now is in Independent Online, and they've done a 3-part series specifically on this conflict, which is all fairly new. But I want to cover this article, the third part in the series, and I'll put the link to the article in the description below the video. And then you can go and watch, actually go and read and watch part 1 and part 2. And those are also linked in this article. So the headline reads, "Time is against Mozambique and SADC in war against Islamic State." Now that's a Southern African region that they speak of. In other words, all of the Southern African countries can be affected by this conflict in northern Mozambique. And it's very significant that this is in the mainstream media at this stage, which means it's reached a point where governments, especially the Mozambican government, cannot keep it under wraps anymore. And the South African government and people in parliament have started speaking about this. Some of them even putting our special ops troops in jeopardy by saying where they are actually training. So they say here this is part of a 3-part series on the crisis in Mozambique, because a crisis is indeed. Many people have died, many people are still dying, there's attacks happening frequently. If you watch my video, and I'll put a link below this one, on the situation in Mozambique, it's extensive. It does a day by day and actually a calendar shaped rundown of events as they have transpired since the beginning of the conflict. Pretoria, the massacres, beheadings, torture and violent conflict engulfing towns in northern Mozambique cannot be left as an island unto itself for the government of Mozambique to handle. So they can't deal with this on their own, they just don't have the ability. Now this was mainly started because the government of Mozambique wasn't even capable of looking after their youth. Does this sound familiar? And therefore these extremists managed to get the youth to join them and join their fight. It gave them relevance, it made them feel important. They were carrying guns, some of them even children carrying guns, as you would have seen in some of the pictures that I put up in the video I put out yesterday. Now that the problem poses a threat to the regional peace and security of the Southern African region, the onus is on all regional governments to become part of the solution, and I fully agree with this. This is a normal way to handle something. You cannot stick your head in the sand and make as if nothing is happening. What you should worry about is whether your government has the competence and ability to actually act. Now, I have full trust in the capabilities of our special ops forces. I don't trust our government. So when it comes to that, I hope the people that are ministers and so on looking after this, that they can make capable decisions. I know that our special forces are already active on the ground in Mozambique, and I'm sure they're doing a sterling job in actually resolving this issue, and some territory has been reclaimed from these people that are trying to declare an Islamic state. under the ISIS flag and actually enforce Sharia law. Now, these people are anti-Christian. They are also anti-Western. They have made statements to this effect in public. They've made beheading videos and all sorts of other gory things. These are the normal terrorist tactics, and it's 100% funded by Zionist, Rothschild enablers. So it's very important to understand that any war or conflict to be used to fight towards a New World Order government is funded by the Rothschilds and their descendants. And it's important to understand that there is a Zionist agenda behind this, even although they use Islamic extremists or whoever it might be. Even then, that's why I mentioned the specific Christian church that's fighting each other. How many people that were killed, people that were arrested, people from the SANDF, people from the SAPS, people from the Metro Police and the correctional services were arrested with their weapons involved in this conflict. So the Zionist movement will stop at nothing to bring on us a third world war. And as Albert Pike said, that war will have to be an Arab-Israeli one. So this is their aim, and we need to be awake to actually what they're doing behind the scenes and not target innocent people that just want to practice their religion in peace. The first people that were attacked by these groups in northern Mozambique were Muslims. They attacked Muslims. They attacked their mosques, went in there with weapons and wanted to force them out. But the communities did not accept them, turned against them, and then they had to flee into the forest where they regrouped and then started their attacks. The African Union will expect the SADC to come up with a coordinated effort to defeat the Islamist insurgency in the northern Mozambique, the way West African nations joined forces to fight the Islamist insurgency in Mali. Just how the SADC is going to do this is the question, bedeviling regional leaders, as SADC lacks the capacity and resources to put boots on the ground in the form of an effective counter-insurgency campaign. And this is important, and this is where things become interesting, because who will they now ask to come and help them? They are saying and admitting that we cannot do this ourselves, and there's a reason for this. I mean, our military is basically a buffoonery at this stage. It's an absolute joke, and sending them in to go and combat something like this is like sending lambs to the slaughter. Because the only people that our SANDF can terrorize is the citizens inside its own borders. What an absolute shame. We have only to look at the shocking failures of mercenaries from the Russian Wagner group to neutralize the insurgency late last year to understand that this will be no walk in the park. So it's already gone to a point where these people not only captured mercenaries, they beheaded them. They killed these oaks. I mean, so mercenaries, beware. This is not a good place to hang out. You know, you're going to have your head on a pole, or on a spike, as they say. It was reported that the Russians had agreed to help quell the insurgency in return for gas concessions. Now we're getting to the real crux of the matter. There's petroleum at play here. And where there's petroleum at play or any kind of resources, the Rothschilds are not far behind. So never put a good thing to waste. As they say, they will use anything, and a good thing to them can be terrorist actions, insurgencies, anything to get what they want. The Wagner group, dubbed by some media as Putin's private army, has been active in counterinsurgency warfare in Libya, Syria, Central African Republic, and has battled Boko Haram in Nigeria and Cameroon. All of these countries are rich in minerals and or oil. The group was well resourced when it entered Mozambique in September last year with state-of-the-art infantry fighting vehicles, drones and helicopter gunships, and had secured air supremacy over the affected areas in northern Mozambique at the behest of the Mozambican government. So this is basically Russia fighting for the Mozambican government. But for all that military hardware and air supremacy, their mission was a dismal failure. Now, why was this the case? And they pulled out of Mozambique with a number of their operatives ambushed, killed, and some even beheaded. I already spoke about that in the video before. Within a week, 7 Wagner mercenaries had been killed. The group pulled out of Mozambique in October last year. So they realized that this is not going to be a small little walk in the park, that there's entire armies that have been put together through youth that are upset with the Mozambican government. Now, something like that can certainly happen here, especially if it's organized and funded, and we need to make sure that we nip anything like that in the bud very, very fast. Air supremacy proved to be irrelevant in this type of insurgency war, given the dense jungle canopy, harsh environment, frequent ambushes, and even lack of fuel given logistical challenges. It was difficult to get intelligence as the locals, who are primarily Muslims, saw foreigners as intruders and became more sympathetic to the Muslim insurgents who were battling government troops, which had often used repressive tactics against the civilian population. So this becomes extremely complex. And certainly anything like that in South Africa would become extremely complex as well. The poorly paid Mozambican troops, many of whom do not always receive their salaries, did not prove to be a motivated and effective fighting force which the mercenaries could rely on in joint offensives. There was also the problem of Mozambique's long and unpatrolled coastline of 2,400 kilometers, and as I mentioned in the previous video, there were many islands that were actually captured by these insurgents. The Mozambican Navy is unable to properly monitor this 2,400 kilometer stretch of coastline, which enables insurgents to launch offensives from the coast in speedboats. Then there was the involvement of Eric Prince, the owner of the now defunct and notorious Blackwater Group that operated in Iraq, and an advisor to the de facto ruler of the UAE, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, known as MBZ, for more than a decade. Prince, who is the brother of Trump Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, is also an unofficial advisor to the Trump administration. Prince is co-chair of the Frontier Services Group, a Hong Kong company. Prince had promised to eliminate the insurgency in Mozambique within 3 months in return for a share of Mozambique's oil and gas revenues. Wow! Do you think Prince himself is behind this, or has the US got some ulterior motives here? In mid-2019, Prince had supplied the Mozambique military with 2 helicopters before the arrival of the 170 Russian mercenaries. Prince had allegedly set a proposal to Wagner offering to supply a ground force as well as aviation-based surveillance, which was allegedly turned down. With the Russians and Prince's group sidelined, the Dyke Advisory Group, made up of South African mercenaries, made their entry, operating at the behest of the Mozambican government. The group is headed by Zimbabwean Max Dyke, the son of former Rhodesian Colonel Lionel Dyke. The presence of South African mercenaries in Mozambique is illegal under South African law, but this has never deterred the mercenaries. Many South African mercenaries have been very successful in many of the African countries, which controls and governs the provisions of military services by private individuals in foreign countries, and the mercenaries risk being detained when they return to South Africa. Well, most of them, they don't have jobs in South Africa, they keep on working in foreign countries as mercenaries. Footage of DAG mercenaries bombing villages in northern Mozambique from low-flying helicopter gunships has put the South African government in a difficult position. The missiles fired from DAG helicopters are being fired indiscriminately into the houses and villages of those suspected to be supporting the insurgents, but the victims are mostly women and children. This is a disaster and not easy for any government to handle. This type of offensive against the insurgents has backfired as the insurgents have regrouped into smaller cells, captured weaponry including mortars from Mozambican army bases, and stage increasingly sophisticated large-scale attacks. And this is where it becomes a problem, okay, when these large-scale attacks starts to happen. What has been significant is the amount of support the insurgents have received from locals. Given the repressive tactics of the government forces and the mercenaries they have colluded with, Mozambique has allegedly asked for air and naval support from South Africa in fighting the insurgency. And we know that our government has actually officially gotten involved and that our special ops forces are on the ground. But this is going to be no walk in the park. But this week the Islamic State threatened that if South Africa puts forces on the ground in Mozambique, then it would open fighting fronts within the borders of South Africa. So they're threatening us, the people of South Africa. This is where it becomes significant, because when you threaten me, you become my enemy. That simple. This makes military involvement by South Africa in the counter-insurgency campaign a huge risk. Well, a risk worth taking. It's best to fight the war there than them bringing it here, because that's going to become messy. Not just for us, but for them too. I can tell you now that there's lots of people waiting for a war over here, and you don't want to unleash that lot, because you have no idea what they will actually do once they get going. These people have not been trained properly. They only have weapons. And in any conflict like that, innocent people end up dying. It's no joke. There will be no quick fix to this problem, given that the conflict is complex, multi-layered, and asymmetrical. In other words, there's no specific structure, no specific leader that can be targeted or taken out. There's a whole lot of different groups doing their own thing. It's like small little terrorist cells that attack. And how do you actually attack that? The answer is you can't. You can't. Because if all the people in the country get behind these insurgencies, or the people in the northern province, there's nothing you can do. You would have to literally annihilate all of them to stop what is happening. And this is why the most effective tactics are on the ground tactics, house to house. Most effective, and nothing can stop it. Read between the lines. There will be no quick fix to this problem. Relations between the two countries have been frosty, and Tanzanian President John Magufuli did not attend President Filipe Nyusi's inauguration in January. Okay? So, what this situation necessitated was that the leadership of Mozambique and Tanzania overcome their differences and actually work together on a common strategy. But things aren't very good between them. The need for intelligence sharing has never been greater, as the jihadist networks extend deep into Tanzania and all the way up the eastern African coast. So this is an entire regional issue. In the absence of the long-promised African standby force that was supposed to have the capacity to intervene in such situations, the SADC region will have little choice but to mobilize an intervention force, as this is not a war that will be won from the air. So finally they know now that this needs to happen on the ground. These people know the ground. They are Mozambicans. They've been living there their whole life. If you send the army into an area where people know every house, alley, and gangway, you don't stand a chance. You can bring in whatever ground troops you want. The locals will always take you out. This happened in Iraq. The American military, you can be outnumbered with guns, tanks, and all the rest. But the moment you walk in between in the neighborhoods, you're going to see your backside. And this is certainly what is happening in this case. In order to defeat the insurgency, the region will have to have a clear understanding of who they are fighting against and what is driving them. And this is the key. And this is why I mentioned what started the problem. The Mozambican government not delivering basic services to these people, especially to the youth. This is a youth uprising. Look at the photos I've posted. It's all young people. They have nothing going for them. And this is the failure of the Mozambican government. Take note, South African government. The insurgency has gained in strength and confidence since it pledged allegiance to Islamic State last year. I mentioned in my previous video that in the middle of last year, ISIS actually confirmed their involvement in the northern Mozambican conflict, which started taking responsibility for attacks. So ISIS openly said that they were responsible for certain attacks. While material deprivation, marginalization, and poverty remain root causes of the restiveness, religion has been a key factor, but it's only one of the factors. It is not the main reason for the success of the insurgency. Muslims have been radicalized by extremist preachers from Kenya, and I mentioned that in my previous video, and Tanzania over many years. Kenyan Islamist militants had sought refuge in Tanzania, and when they were repressed there, they moved on and settled in northern Mozambique. The movement began in 2007. Now this is key. This is 13 years ago. So over time, this has festered now to the point where there's this massive situation that threatens peace in South Africa. As a religious sect, which locals called Al-Shabaab, which rejected the secular state and wanted to impose Sharia rule. They tore down Christian crosses and statues of Mozambique's independent leaders Eduardo Mondlane and Samora Machel. The adherents wanted their children to go to religious schools, women had to wear the burqa and were not allowed to work outside the home. So these people were bringing in a form of Sharia law that is not normal to the average Muslims that lived in the area, and they imposed this on them. Their interpretation of Islam differed from other Sunni Muslims in that they wore shoes in their mosques and prayed 3 times a day. The early movement had attempted to withdraw from society but shifted to a violent approach in 2015 in response to state repression against them. In 2016, many Al-Shabaab members were jailed and their mosques destroyed, which is when they began attacking the state. So there was a spark created that moved over to the situation we find ourselves in today. And the spark was created by a government not knowing what they were doing or getting involved in. Now that the group has pledged allegiance to Islamic State and is formally part of the Islamic State of Central African Province, these outside forces will heavily influence the group's strategy, tactics and targeting. This is problematic and this is my big concern. Before I wouldn't speak about this, but the moment the Islamic State got involved, I know that they're funded by the Rothschilds, by Zionist interests, and this is where it becomes a problem because they can be used in any way to make their wants and wishes for a new world order happen in South Africa. And there's no better way than to do that than through violence. In other words, people will hand over their freedom for the promise of security. And this is what this can very quickly become. So you need to be wide awake with what's happening and what our government is doing. This has hugely complicated the trajectory of the conflict, and a regional force will have to carefully strategize on how best such a motivated fighting force can be defeated with Mozambique's porous borders and an unpatrolled coastline. So you can get people coming into this fight from anywhere because there's actually no border fence on the borders of Mozambique in many areas, as well as the very, very long coastline. I mean, 2,400 kilometers is very easy to get into their country. But time is against the SADC and Mozambique, as longer the insurgents have to mobilize forces from within the region and to attract foreign fighters, and the more finances and weaponry they are able to accrue. Now the question is, where do the finances come from? When you follow the money trail, you will see where this comes from and everything will become very clear. When you understand where the New World Order needs to be established and how it needs to be established, what the end goal is with a one world government, a one world leader and a one world religion, everything will start to make sense to you. So it will be very hard to defeat them, and at this stage it's something that I'll be reporting on as this continues. I'll keep you up to speed. I will let you know how this is affecting us in the long run. Remember, this is the northern province in Mozambique. It's not at the southern border or the South African border yet, but it can very quickly go there. I know that there's been sleeper cells within South Africa for decades now, and the names might change, but the motive is still exactly the same. Watch this space. Thank you for watching this video. Please go to this link and go and read through part 1 and 2 of the series on IOL. Remember, this is independent reporting. They claim to be independent reporters, and it's some of the best material that you will find from these reporters will come from IOL. So take that into consideration if you want to find news from anywhere. Certainly people have their motives. I make my motives clear. I'm here to fight the New World Order ideology. This is my main aim, and I will expose any of their involvement anyway. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not yet. Click the bell icon to get notifications. And please share the video. Thank you very much.